Hello everyone and welcome in, I'm echohack, and today we're taking a detailed look at every known legendary aspect in Diablo 4 so far. Note that this is an early look at aspects in Diablo 4 based on Blizzard's press preview, and all of these are subject to change. Alright, let's jump into it. First of all, getting aspects. There's two ways to get aspects in Diablo 4. First, you can simply get a legendary item to drop during normal gameplay. You can go ahead and equip that legendary item to use the aspect, or you can travel to the Occultist to extract the aspect from the legendary item. By the way, if you don't know about the Occultist yet, check out my Occultist video on the channel. Once you have an extracted aspect, you can imprint that aspect onto any rare item or legendary item that you wish. If you imprint a rare item, it will become a legendary item. And if you imprint a legendary item, it will override that existing aspect. Second, if you complete a dungeon, you will unlock an imprintable aspect from the Codex of Power, or the Codex for short. You can simply imprint these aspects onto rare and legendary items, just like the ones you can extract from legendary items at the Occultist. However, the Codex aspects have some limitations, and that means finding a legendary item will always be better than using a Codex aspect. Because it's relatively easy to complete a dungeon versus finding the legendary item you're looking for, this makes the Codex of Power aspects fantastic for getting your character started. Later on, taking your character to the max will require unleashing your terrible power upon the enemies of Sanctuary to unearth their wealth. So first of all, let's talk about Codex of Power aspect limitations. Not every legendary is going to be able to be found in the Codex of Power, and not every single aspect is there. This means that you can only find some legendaries the good old-fashioned way, by destroying hordes of demons of hell over and over again. Second limitation. Aspects that are imprinted from the Codex of Power automatically imprint the lowest roll possible. For example, if you wanted to imprint the aspect Thorn's damage dealt has a 20 to 40% chance to deal damage to all enemies around you, then it would automatically imprint the 20% chance. That's half the power of a full max roll on a legendary item. Alright, third, there are aspect categories. Not all aspects can be imprinted to just any rare or legendary item. Aspects are divided by category, and depending on its category, it can be imprinted on different slots on your character. This forces you to really think a little bit more deeply about your build, instead of just putting every single damage multiplier you can on all of your items. So here's the categories. First of all, we have offensive. This includes gloves, one-handed weapon, two-handed weapon at plus 100% effectiveness, ring, and amulet at plus 50% effectiveness. We have defensive. That includes helm, chest, pants, and amulet slots, and the amulet slots at plus 50% effectiveness. Resource, helm, ring, and amulet, and then of course amulet is plus 50% effectiveness. Utility, we have helm, chest, boots, gloves, and amulet at 50% effectiveness, plus 50% effectiveness, and mobility, which includes boots and amulet at plus 50% effectiveness. There are two slots that are special, two-handed weapons and amulets. And two-handed weapons add plus 100% effectiveness to the aspect, and amulets add plus 50% effectiveness to the aspect. So this makes the two-handed weapons and amulet slots incredibly valuable. For example, using Thorn's damage dealt has a 20 to 40% chance to deal damage to all enemies around you aspect on a two-handed weapon slot would double the range up to 40 through 80%. Alright, now let's dive into all the legendary aspects. First up, we have legendary aspects that can be used on any class. These are in the Codex of Power, and you can just, it doesn't matter which class you are, anyone can use these. So first up is Disobedience. This is a defensive aspect. All enemies afflicted with a damage over time effect deal 20% less damage to you. Next up, Edge Masters. This is an offensive aspect. All skills deal up to times 24% increased damage based on available resource when cast, receiving the full benefit when at full resource. Ghostwalker, a mobility aspect. You may move freely through enemies while below 40% total life. Inner Calm, an offensive aspect. Deal 3% increased damage for each second you stand still, up to times 30%. Might, a defensive aspect. Basic skills grant 25% damage reduction for 4 seconds. Needle Flare, an offensive aspect. Thorn's damage dealt has a 20% chance to deal damage to all enemies around you. Protecting, defensive aspect. When struck, a magical bubble forms around you for 8 seconds, absorbing end damage. Can only occur once per 10 seconds. Pummeling, offensive aspect. Deal times 40% increased damage to stunned, knocked down, and frozen enemies. Rapid, offensive aspect. Basic skills gain 23% attack speed. Shared Misery, utility aspect. Lucky Strike. When you hit a crowd-controlled enemy, there's up to a 30% chance for that crowd control effect to spread to another unaffected nearby enemy. Deflecting Barrier, defensive aspect. While you have a barrier active, there is a 20% chance to ignore incoming direct damage from distant enemies. The Expectant, offensive aspect. Enemies hit with basic skills increases the damage of your next core skill by times 5%, up to times 50%. Protector, defensive aspect. Every 10 seconds, gain a barrier absorbing up to end damage. Umbral, resource aspect. Restore 1 resource when you crowd control an enemy. Wind Striker, mobility aspect. Critical strikes grant 8% movement speed for 1 second. The duration can be extended. All right, next up we have Barbarian Aspects. These are only available on the Barbarian, and as far as we know, they appear to work, these class-specific ones appear to work like smart loot, right? So like, these don't drop for the other classes, what we've seen so far. First up we have Ancestral Echoes, offensive aspect. Lucky Hit. Damaging enemies with Leap, Upheaval, or Whirlwind has up to a 40% chance to summon an Ancient to perform the same skill. Can only happen once every 5 seconds. Ancestral Force, offensive aspect. Hammer of the Ancient quakes outward, dealing 32% of its damage to enemies. Anemia, utility aspect. Lucky Hit. Direct damage against bleeding enemies has up to a 31% chance to stun them for 2 seconds. Brawlers, offensive aspect. Enemies damaged by kick or charge will explode if they are killed within the next 2 seconds, dealing end damage to nearby enemies. Bolkathos, defense aspect. Leap creates an earthquake that deals end physical damage over 4 seconds. While standing in earthquakes, you gain 5% increased damage reduction. Death Wish, offensive aspect. Barbarian gains end thorns while berserking. Echoing Fury, resource aspect. Your shout skills generate 2 fury per second while active. Numbing Wrath, defensive aspect. Each point of fury generated while at maximum fury grants 9 fortify. Perpetual Stomping, mobility aspect. Damaging an enemy with kick or ground stomp resets Leap's cooldown. Quickening Pulse, offensive aspect. Lucky Strike, up to 40% chance to reduce the cooldowns of your non-ultimate skills by 1.5 seconds when you inflict bleeding on elites. Relentless Berserkers, utility aspect. Lucky Hit, damaging an enemy with a core skill has up to a 22% chance to extend the duration of berserking by 1 second. Double this duration if it was a critical strike. Slacking, resource aspect. Lucky Hit, you have up to a 30% chance to gain 20 fury when Ren does direct damage to at least 1 bleeding enemy. Tempering Blows, defensive aspect. After swapping weapons 6 times, gain in Fortify. Dire Whirlwind, offensive aspect. Whirlwind's critical strike chance is increased by 5% for each second that it is channeled, up to 20%. Iron Warrior, defensive aspect. Iron Skin also makes you unstoppable. Relentless Arms Master, resource aspect. Gain times 20% increased fury generation while all damage bonuses from the Walking Arsenal are active. Unrelenting Fury, resource aspect. Killing an enemy with a core skill refunds 10% of its base fury cost. Can only happen once per skill cast. Veteran Brawler, offensive aspect. Each time a core skill deals direct damage to an enemy, your next charge or leap deals 15% increased damage up to 225%. Wind Striker, offensive aspect. After swapping weapons 6 times, gain plus 20% increased attack speed for 4 seconds. Alright, that's it for the Barbarian Aspects. Now, let's go into the Druid Aspects. Ballistic, utility aspect. When you have fortified life, your earth skills gain plus 3. Crash Stone, offensive aspect. Earth skills deal times 40% more critical strike damage to crowd-controlled enemies. Cyclonic Force, defensive aspect. Cyclone armor also provides physical damage reduction. In addition, cyclone armor will also be applied to all nearby allies. Mangled, resource aspect. Gain 1 spirit when you're stuck as a werebear. Mending Stone, defensive aspect. The duration of Earthen Bulwark is increased by 6 seconds. In addition, killing an enemy with Earth skills replenishes N of your active Earthen Bulwark's barrier. Night Howlers, offensive aspect. Blood Howl increases critical strike chance by 5%. In addition, Blood Howl also affects nearby companions and players for 3 seconds. Overcharge, offensive aspect. Lucky Hit, up to a 10% chance when dealing lightning damage to overload the target for 3 seconds, causing any direct damage you deal to them to pulse for N additional damage to nearby enemies. Quicksand, utility aspect. Damage from Earth skills slows enemies hit by 25% for 5 seconds. Retaliation, offensive aspect. Your core skills deal up to 20% increased damage based on your percent fortified health. Shepherds, offensive aspect. Core skills deal an additional 6% damage for each active companion. Skinwalkers, defensive aspect. When you use a shape-shifting skill that changes your form, gain in life. If you're at full life, gain the same amount as Fortify. Stalking Beast, defensive aspect. Gain stealth for 2 seconds when killing enemies with Shred. Breaking stealth with an attack grants Ambush, which guarantees critical strikes for 1 second. Storm Beasts, resource aspect. Lucky Hit. Storm skills have up to a 15% chance to grant 10 spirit. Your base storm skills are also now werewolf skills. Storm Shifters, utility aspect. While Hurricane is active, gain plus 3 to your shape-shifting skills. Changeling's Debt, resource aspect. Werebear skills restore 1 spirit when you hit enemies afflicted by your poisons. When spirit is restored, your poison effects are removed from the enemy. Rampaging Werebeast, offensive aspect. The duration of Grizzly Rage is increased by 1 second. In addition, critical strikes while Grizzly Rage is active increase your critical strike damage by 10% for the duration. Tempest, offensive aspect. Hurricane damage is increased by times 7% each second while active. Unsatiated, resource aspect. After killing an enemy with Shred, your next werewolf skill generates times 20% more spirit and deals times 20% increased damage. Ursine Horror, offensive aspect. Pulverize is also now an earth skill. After casting Pulverize, tectonic spikes continue to deal in damage over 2 seconds. Vigorous, defensive aspect. Gain 10% damage reduction while shapeshift into a werewolf. Alright, that's it for the Druid aspects. Let's go into the Necromancer aspects next. Blighted, offensive aspect. The Shadow Blight passive deals times 15% increased damage against slowed or chilled enemies and times 30% increased damage against stunned enemies instead. Bloodseekers, offensive aspect. Blood Lance deals 15% increased damage to its primary target per lanced target. Blood Bathed, offensive aspect. Blood Surge's Nova echoes again after a short delay, dealing times 60% less damage. Bursting Bones, offensive aspect. When a segment of bone prison is destroyed or expired, it deals 48 damage in an area around itself. Empowering Reaper, offensive aspect. Each target hit along Sever's path increases the scythe's damage by times 6%, up to times 30%. Fast Blood, utility aspect. Blood orbs reduce your ultimate cooldown by 0.5 seconds. Flesh Rending, utility aspect. After Decompose spawns a corpse, gain 10 essence. Grasping Veins, utility aspect. Enemies who are stunned by corpse tendrils are also made vulnerable for its duration. If they die while stunned, they have a 15% chance to spawn a blood orb. Hulking, utility aspect. Each time your golem damages an enemy, its active cooldown is reduced by 1 second. Possessed Blood, offensive aspect. When you pick up 5 blood orbs, a free bone spirit is spawned, dealing bonus damage based on your current life percent. Potent Blood, resource aspect. While at full life, blood orbs grant 10 essence. Reanimation, offensive aspect. Your skeletons gain increased damage while alive, up to times 20% after 10 seconds. Requiem, utility aspect. You gain 3 maximum essence per active minion. Sacrificial. Utility aspect. Your sacrifice bonuses are increased by 15%. Swelling Curse. Offensive aspect. Bone Spirit deals increased damage based on distance traveled, up to 15%. The Damned. Offensive aspect. You deal times 30% increased shadow damage to enemies afflicted by both Decrepify and Iron Maiden. Void. Utility aspect. Blight's defiled area, when spawned, pulls in enemies around the affected area. Torment. Utility aspect. Critical strikes with bone skills increase your essence regeneration by times 30% for 4 seconds. Torturous. Utility aspect. Enemies afflicted by your Iron Maiden have a 15% chance to be stunned for 1 second when they deal direct damage. Unyielding Commanders. Offensive aspect. While the Army of the Dead is active, your minions gain 70% attack speed and take 90% reduced damage. All right, that's it for Necromancer Aspects. Let's jump into Rogue Aspects next. Arrow Storms. Offensive aspect. Lucky Hit. Your ranged skills have up to a 10% chance to create an arrow storm at the target's present location, dealing N physical damage over 3 seconds. You can have up to 5 active arrow storms. Blast Trappers. Offensive aspect. Lucky Hit. Dealing direct damage to enemies affected by your trap skills has up to a 30% chance to make them vulnerable for 3 seconds. Branching Volleys. Offensive aspect. Barrage's arrows have a 15% chance to split into 2 arrows whenever they ricochet. Cheats. Defensive aspect. You take 15% less damage from crowd-controlled enemies. Whenever a crowd-controlled enemy deals direct damage to you, gain plus 15% movement speed for 2 seconds. Corruption. Offensive aspect. Your imbuements have times 20% increased potency against vulnerable enemies. Encircling Blades. Offensive aspect. Flurry damages enemies in a circle around you and deals times 8% increased damage. Energizing. Resource aspect. Damaging an injured enemy with a basic skill generates 5 energy. Enshrouding. Defensive aspect. Gain a Dark Shroud shadow every 3 seconds when standing still. Each Dark Shadow grants 2% increased damage reduction. Explosive Verve. Utility aspect. Your grenades count as trap skills. Whenever you arm a trap or drop grenades, you gain plus 10% increased movement speed for 3 seconds. Opportunists. Offensive aspect. When you break concealment, you drop a cluster of stun grenades around your location that explode, dealing N total physical damage and stunning enemies for 0.25 seconds. Ravenous. Resource aspect. Killing a vulnerable enemy grants you times 50% increased resource regeneration for 4 seconds. Shadow Slicer. Offensive aspect. When you cast Dash, a shadow clone is spawned at your location that also casts Dash, dealing 25% of the base damage. Siphoned Protection. Defensive aspect. Lucky Hit. Damaging a vulnerable enemy with a core skill has up to a 20% chance to grant you a barrier for 5 seconds that absorbs in damage up to a maximum of O. Sleeting Imbuements. Offensive aspect. Your rain of arrows is always affected by all imbuement skills at once. Tricksters. Offensive aspect. Caltrops also throw a cluster of stun grenades that explode and deal 52 total physical damage and stunning enemies for 0.25 seconds. Uncanny Resilience. Defensive aspect. Whenever you trigger a lucky hit, gain times 5% increased damage reduction for 5 seconds, up to a maximum of times 15%. Unstable Imbuements. Offensive aspect. Casting a skill that is imbued creates an explosion around you, dealing N damage of the same type. Vengeful. Offensive aspect. Lucky hit. Making an enemy vulnerable has up to a 30% chance to grant plus 3% increased critical strike chance for 3 seconds, up to plus 9%. Volatile Blades. Offensive aspect. Twisting blades cause an explosion when they return to you, dealing N damage and N additional damage based on the distance the blades travel, up to 5 meters, and N total damage. Volatile Shadows. Offensive aspect. When a Dark Shroud shadow would be removed, it explodes, dealing N shadow damage around you. Alright, that's it for Rogue Aspects. Now, let's move on to finally the last class, Sorcerer. Let's get into those Sorcerer Aspects. Biting Cold. Offensive aspect. When you freeze an enemy, there is a 25% chance they become vulnerable for 3 seconds. Charged. Mobility aspect. Collecting crackling energy increases your movement speed by 10% for 4 seconds. Conflagration. Offensive aspect. While channeling Incinerate, your burning damage is increased by times 20%. Control. Offensive aspect. You deal 30% more damage to immobilized, stunned, or frozen enemies. Efficiency. Offensive Aspect. Casting a basic skill reduces the mana cost of your next core skill by 10%. Elementalists. Offensive Aspect. Core or mastery skills cast at or above 100 mana gain 20% increased critical strike chance. Flamewalkers. Mobility Aspect. Coming into contact with your firewall grants you plus 15% movement speed for 4 seconds. Incendiary. Resource Aspect. Killing a burning enemy grants 5% mana cost reduction for 4 seconds, up to times 15%. Piercing Cold. Offensive Aspect. Ice shards pierce 4 times, dealing 20% less damage per subsequent enemy hit. Prodigies. Resource Aspect. Casting an ultimate skill restores 80 mana. Recharging. Resource Aspect. Each time chain lightning bounces off you, gain 4 mana. Rolling Thunder. Offensive Aspect. Charged bolts pierce, but deal times 30% less damage. Searing Flesh. Utility Aspect. Every 5 times you deal direct fire damage to an enemy, they are immobilized for 2 seconds. Snow Guards. Defensive Aspect. While within your own blizzard, you take 10% less damage. Snow Veiled. Defensive Aspect. Casting ice armor makes you unstoppable for 2 seconds. Splintering Energy. Offensive Aspect. Lightning Spear has an 11% chance to spawn an additional Lightning Spear when you cast it. Storm Swell. Offensive Aspect. You deal times 11 increased damage to vulnerable enemies while you have a barrier. Bounding Conduit. Mobility Aspect. Gain 20% movement speed for 3 seconds after teleporting. Unwavering. Defensive Aspect. Taking direct damage has a 5% chance to reset the cooldown of one of your defensive skills. 3 Curses. Offensive Aspect. Meteor deals times 35% increased critical strike damage against healthy targets. That is a whole lot of legendary aspects. There's even more legendaries that I haven't found yet, or maybe aren't even in the game yet. And on top of that, we also know that unique items are still coming to the game at higher levels, or we just haven't found them in the current media preview of the game. What's your favorite aspect so far? Let me know down in the comments. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.